What's the good word, y'all? DKB here. So, crazy day of cuts. A lot of initial shock. My jaw was dropped for quite some time. And then as I kind of sat and got to think about it, a lot of the moves that we made kind of make a decent amount of sense to me, at least in some facets. So, let's go ahead and dive into what the current depth chart looks like and kind of talk about some of these cuts that were made at the quarterback position. We know that we lost the heroes, Chris Streveler. That was really no shocker. It was really a matter of if Mike White showed enough to the coaching staff to retain him, which he obviously did after having that big game against the Giants. And I'm pretty confident Chris Streveler isn't going to be able to come back, although we are fourth in the waiver wire claim, so I'm kind of interested to see, because Robert Saleh did make some comments about wanting a lot of these guys back on his practice squad. I don't know which way I'm leaning in terms of what Joe Douglas might do, retaining a lot of our players that just didn't quite fit what we're looking for right here, right now, versus some of those immediate upgrades that they feel like might take precedence over what we did have. So it'll be interesting. Either way, though, the quarterback room is essentially what it should be realistically. Granted, I would have kept Streveler over Mike White, but it is what it is. So when we look in the running back room, this was probably one of the first initial shocks that we got. I think he was one of the first cuts that was mentioned today, or at least yesterday by the time you guys see this, which was Tevin Coleman. We ended up bringing him back when we re-signed him. Everybody expected that he was going to not only make the roster, but essentially still keep some of that high-level duty as kind of the veteran in the room. That'll still get a decent amount of snaps on a game-by-game basis, but one of the things I was talking about recently also was the fact that the running back room isn't one that necessarily needs a veteran presence in it, or at least from the standpoint of what we're usually accustomed to. Michael Carter's already been installed. He's very comfortable with it. He's been learning a lot more from his own words in terms of these pass block sets, and different ways he wants to attack the hole in terms of what may open up. So we also know Michael Carter is the de facto, team mascot in terms of leadership. He personifies exactly what the New York Jets want outside of just the running back position group. One Jets Drive dropped the video, episode 3, where Elijah Moore is mentioning what Michael Carter does for him, as well as the entire team as well. So I was comfortable with the fact that we might go full in on the youth movement here, which is the case. So currently, Breece Hall is actually now listed as number 1 on the depth chart, with Michael Carter as 2, interestingly enough. Ty Johnson also ends up making a roster as the 3rd stringer, and then we have Zonovan Bam Knight that ends up rounding us out at 4. So for 1, we end up carrying 4. In case of injury, more likely than not, Zonovan Knight also does add that special teams value to the room. I'm more so curious about Ty Johnson versus LaMichael Pirine. I thought personally Pirine was having a bit of a better camp than Ty Johnson. Johnson didn't seem to show the same level of pop and burst that I've seen last season in some of the plays before. Again, there's a lot of issues chemistry-wise with the offensive line and what they were able to do, because that was one of my biggest questions as well. We haven't seen very many explosive plays out of this run game, or even ones that we can say we're comfortable knowing we'll get a solid 3 to 5 yards here. So with that said, though, running back room, nothing extremely surprising. I think, if anything, the absence of Tevin Coleman means that the New York Jets are very comfortable with what Breece Hall and Michael Carter are going to offer in the receiving game. So I'm all for it. Sprinkle Ty Johnson in there. Let Zonovan Knight come in and get adjusted a little bit to this New York Jets offense. We should be good to go for the foreseeable future, even if we end up moving on from Ty Johnson. So when we turn to the wide receiver room, a lot of us were disappointed. One of the things that struck me was that Robert Saleh does tend to try to be pretty honest in his press conferences. So he did mention when Denzel Mims' trade request came up that he had no plans to let him go. He was one of the best 6 receivers on the roster, and that should have been an immediate indicator of kind of what was going to happen in regards to I want to say it's Isaac Charles and then Calvin Jackson. So Calvin Jackson, I was a big fan of. Everybody loves the 2 game winning touchdowns. Keep in mind, outside of that, I think I seen something crazy like he only had 4 catches for essentially 4 yards, something like that. So there wasn't, immediate explosive plays, but we understand that his route running prowess was going to allow him to get open. That's something that should buy his way into immediate playing time. If he was able to make the roster, Isaac Charles ends up offering that extremely big frame that we really don't have outside of a Corey Davis and a Denzel Mims at 6'4". So these are guys that I fully expect we might be able to end up stashing. I do think they are going to be an immediate, priority in terms of waiver wire claims for us as somebody we can stash and develop, because we don't know what's going to happen with Denzel Mims. Even though Jeff Smith secured a roster spot as well, we really don't know what he will become, and we're adding a lot more pieces that can take over some of these special team duties that these lower tier guys have that, time might just be running out for. So we do have Corey Davis. Robert Saleh also mentioned that Denzel Mims would be the guy to step in essentially into a Corey Davis role if an injury were to occur, which is interesting because Denzel Mims is essentially slotted, depending on who you talk to, is the number 6 or number 5, exchanging with Jeff Smith. So Corey Davis, Jeff Smith, Garrett Wilson, Mims, and then we have Elijah Moore and Berrios. So no real shockers outside of the group of people that think maybe one of these undrafted free agents earned a spot ahead of Denzel Mims, probably prior to the Giants game, or at least ahead of Jeff Smith. But keep in mind, it's not like they were offering a huge amount of special teams efforts for us either. And when we take a look at the depth chart, there's definitely a pretty solid emphasis on guys that we knew contributed in an exceptional factor in that part of the game. So tight end, I think the biggest shocker is that we ended up keeping 4 in lieu of keeping a fullback on the roster, at least for now. So Lawrence Cager ends up winning out over Kenny Yeboah and Trayvon Wesco. And I kind of expect that at least one of these guys will end up coming back onto the practice squad. Most likely I'll probably end up saying Wesco because his bread and butter is at least the blocking ability. Whereas Kenny Yeboah, he just didn't really develop for us in any meaningful fashion as we expected. So Lawrence Cager, wide receiver convert, he's going to give us some amazing red zone packages for one, and we've seen all throughout the preseason, again, vanilla defenses, half speed kind of simulations going on, but Lawrence Cager can be a huge mismatch for a lot of these safeties, a lot of these linebackers that he's going to end up coming across, where he's going to completely either outrun you, or if it's a jump ball instance and he kind of has you beat, it's a wrap for them. So I'm excited for a lot of what those packages may look like if he absolutely makes, version 3 or whatever our final roster ends up looking like. But considering we want to run 2 tight end packages, and in the event of injury, I think it is smart that we are carrying a 4th guy that we assumingly would have a very strong idea of when and how we're going to use him, so that he's not essentially only taking up a roster spot for, 50 snaps in a season. We talked about Nick Bawden not making it. We'll see what happens on if we end up retaining him and kind of keeping that natural fullback role, or if we end up using maybe Jeremy Ruckert or CJ and essentially that Trayvon Wesco specialization. Offensive line. Our tackle room got blown completely up, at least in terms of the depth pieces. So Chuma Edoga was a potential trade candidate with the Cowboys. Interest either died down, or maybe Joe Douglas didn't think he was getting suitable value for it, which I can't see that being the reason. If ultimately we were going to cut him either way, even if you get a 7th round pick, that's something, but maybe it was on a conditional basis and it just wasn't really worth it. So Chuma Edoga is gone. We end up getting rid of Grant Hermans, and I know there's another name I feel like Connor McDermott. There we go. And we get rid of Connor McDermott. So 2 turnstile guys, in my opinion, in Edoga and McDermott. And then Hermans was just a guy that seems like he came in and kind of had that, why am I forgetting the guy that the Packers drafted? The name's not coming to me, but he essentially came into camp and just kind of got into a bunch of fights. Could have potentially thrown the chemistry off, so I'm not necessarily disappointed. I know one of you guys were mentioning in the comments, though, a little bit of Herman's background in terms of what he's offering from a physical standpoint, which is great. But, there's a balance to everything there. So other than that, no real surprises. The offensive line, at least in terms of the starting unit and the main backups, remain status quo. Tackle is definitely going to be one of the immediate positions that I would say keep an eye on the waiver wire claim for. There are some interesting names that were out there, but considering I kind of dive in 100% on New York Jets only for the most part, outside of when rumors or reports come up, I'm going to have to do some research. But I know one of the big names out there was Alex Leatherwood. So we'll see what happens on that front. But we're in good position, at least picking number 4 in the waiver wire claim. When we go to the defense, though, so this is where a lot of the juicy stuff started happening in terms of cuts and who made it, who didn't. So we end up carrying 11 defensive linemen. There was a lot of guys kind of upset about who made the cut versus who didn't. Tanzel Smart gets cut. Bradley Anae, Jabari Zuniga, Jonathan Marshall. I would say the biggest shock to me is probably Tanzel or Jonathan Marshall, because Tanzel was kind of on a complete tear during the preseason. He had the most amount of pressures on the team, if I'm remembering correctly. If not, he was definitely number 2 or tied for number 2. And then we seen him kind of explode on the interior as well. So it would have been a nice rotation to have him in there. Keep in mind, he's also one of the best run defenders, at least throughout the preseason that we've had. So the question mark will be, we've seen his pass rushing ability. We've seen what he offered in the running game. Why didn't he necessarily make the cut per se? Jonathan Marshall, same thing, especially considering that was a JD pick. I wasn't 100% certain that he was going to make the roster, but in the same vein, he was a guy who also ended the preseason very nicely. So it's a shocker. But when we take a look at kind of the breakdown at our edge positions, Carl Lawson, JFM, at least on the depth chart, Vinny Curry, Jacob Martin behind them, and then we have Jermaine Johnson at third string with Bryce Huff, Michael Clemens as the third and fourth respectively, and then on the interior, Q, Solomon Thomas still slotted next to him, and then Sheldon Rankins and Nathan Shepard behind him. Going back to these cuts, Nathan Shepard is definitely the odd man out if we want to talk performance. I know at this point I feel like there might be some minor emotional strings or, kind of loyalty tied to some of these picks, because Nathan Shepard didn't beat Tanzel Smart. I would argue that he was losing to Jonathan Marshall in the battle. Bradley Anae, Jabari Zuniga, those are more outside guys. They don't necessarily count as part of this conversation, but I'm not quite sure how they kept him over those two, outside of the fact that he did come back to us on a cheaper contract instead of going elsewhere, and then they do like the work ethic and things that he brings. But again, it's more so about what the game day performances are going to look like. So we'll see if that ultimately ends up changing. I think we can definitely sneak Marshall back onto the roster. I think Smart is going to be a hard ask for that. The linebacker unit is what's crazy to me. Obviously, we'll probably add another piece or two, but at the moment, we're only going with 4 linebackers. Quan Alexander, CJ, and Quincy slated as the starters, with Jamie and Sherwood behind him. Hamza Nasruddin actually ends up getting cut. Same thing with Delshon Phillips. So not huge surprises. Hamza actually had an uphill battle. I've talked about it before. Jamie Sherwood, from the communication mental standpoint, had the leg up, and then he also was able to put a lot of work in to gain weight as part of his recovery to stand up to the rigors of what this defense is asking from him. So he might not be the more athletically fit guy for this defense, but he definitely is more so of a plug-and-play person, and we've seen him pop on film a little bit during the preseason. So, again, the only real shocker here is the fact that we only kept 4 of these guys. Another position I would say is probably going to be, right behind tackle, probably the biggest priority in terms of waiver wire claims that we put in. Safety room got obliterated. Everybody that we thought was going to be in this competition to back up LaMarcus Joyner, or as part of the battle to start ahead of him, got cut. We end up left with Ashton Davis, which the huge uproar is about, and then Tony Adams, who actually quietly was having a pretty awesome preseason. as an undrafted free agent pickup for us. So this one is what kind of, as I sat on it, it brought me a little bit of clarity. Jason Pinnock, he had all the reports, he was earning a lot of first team starting reps when LaMarcus Joyner's been out with injuries, still trying to recover. Will Parks has been on the rise throughout preseason. Here's how it makes sense to me. So Jason Pinnock, we know what he is. We know that developmentally wise, we thought he could be the future at free safety for us and take over officially for LaMarcus Joyner after this season. But we know he brings the physical tools. If we pay attention to the stats and if we watch the film, we know from a coverage aspect, he's rough. He's almost like the Ashton Davis of the free safety spot for us, but he just offers a lot more in terms of his physical profile, and then a little bit better production than what I would say Ashton Davis offers. Will Parks was on the rise. That's the harder one for me to argue. But if you want to compare apples to apples, I would probably say Tony Adams was either right with him or he was just below him. And if you want to go with kind of the age factor and, him being able to adjust quicker, things like that, Tony Adams, I can see being the guy. Ashton Davis is a huge head scratcher. The only reason this makes sense to me is that they don't plan on really playing him at free safety at all. He's purely going to be a strong safety, which he's also labeled under in the depth chart, with Tony Adams backing Davis up, which means we may be looking for another guy that is purely going to be that deep safety where we can allow Jordan Whitehead, we can allow Ashton Davis when he's subbing in, we can allow Tony Adams to play closer to the line as needed. So I think that's the look that we'll be trying to run out with more often than not. And from that standpoint, he's probably better than what Jason Pinnock and Will Parks were going to be, who were essentially training specifically as a free safety for this defense. So I don't know. It's still a tough one to swallow, having every key player that was in this competition essentially get cut. And I know he's mentioned that he's really hoping that we get them back, but it's, again, kind of a far cry opportunity that may happen. This would be that final, top three of those positions between tackle, linebacker, and safety, where I would say safety is literally probably right behind linebacker because we at least know what that looks like. LaMarcus Joyner, we're still praying that the health is where it needs to be, and then after that we have nothing, literally. So we'll see what ultimately ends up happening with that. I'm excited for the next 48 hours for sure. Jefferson was a huge name that popped up on the radar. We'll see if they go that route or if something else happens. But I would have to imagine that they are going to try to find somebody that's a little bit younger that can kind of learn behind Joyner this year and then fight for that starting position next year. Other than that, though, cornerback, I won't say there was really too many surprises. We still keep Sauce. We still keep DJ Reed. Bryce Hall is there. Javelin Guidry did get cut, but we also have to keep in mind he wasn't any direct competition per se to Michael Carter II, who kind of was hit with the untouchable label per se. But it does leave me questioning the slot cornerback depth, unless we feel like Bryce Hall, Brandon Echols, or DJ Reed is willing and or can function in that spot successfully. Then that does leave us a little bit susceptible if something does happen to Michael Carter, where we're kind of left scratching our heads a bit. This is also where we see Justin Hardy still make the roster, and everybody assumed he was going to be an immediate cut because he's literally played, now I want to say the number 0% because I keep seeing different things, but he's played either 2 snaps or less on our defense since we've picked him up. So he's literally a core special teamer for Brant Boyer's special teams unit. It begs the question, was that the smartest move, considering maybe we could have kept a Tanzel Smart at least for the initial, 53. There's still going to be a lot of changes that come up, but it is what it is. I think some of the other takeaways, or I guess the one final takeaway I would have is I've been hearing a lot of slack about Braden Mann and him not necessarily being what we expected when we drafted him per se, and that maybe we try to look for an upgrade there as well. And I know there was a previous Pro Bowler that was cut. I actually think there was two. I can't remember the teams or the names, but I would say if there's four positions, at least from reports and everything I've researched and been able to kind of check out, it's definitely going to be tackle, followed by safety, linebacker, and then punter if you do believe that they're not happy with Braden Mann. So we'll see. It's definitely not the worst 53-man initial roster that we've seen at any point. I think this speaks a lot to what Joe Douglas has accomplished with bringing in our talent. I don't know if we even still keep 11 ultimately. I think we find a way to maybe upgrade Nathan Shepard. I don't want to say find a way to let Vinny Curry go, but to be honest, we don't need that much veteran leadership there if you want to lean on Carl Lawson and maybe Jacob Martin as the guys for that. And then Quentin Williams in terms of the defensive tackle group. But either way, let me know what your guys' thoughts are. I know this was extremely crazy with what the initial reports and everything that came through was. So I'm curious to see what you guys thought should have happened in terms of some of these cuts and where you think the focus on some of these waiver wire claims are going to be. I'll catch you guys again. Peace.